Hello and welcome to Banking Transform, the top podcast in retail banking. I'm your host, Jim Marous, owner and CEO of the Digital Banking Report and co-publisher of the Financial Brand. From the complexities of legacy infrastructure to the nuances of modern app development and the ever-evolving threat landscape, banking is faced with balancing performance, speed, and security every day. Join us in this episode of the Banking Transform podcast as we sit down with Michael Wiley, the VP and Chief Technology Officer of F5, to explore the multifaceted world of banking cybersecurity within the context of digital transformation. Wiley's expertise offers practical guidance for all banking executives seeking to strike the right balance between innovation and protection. As the banking industry continues to transform its businesses, the wisdom shared in this episode serves as a beacon for securing a safer and more resilient future. Today's threat landscape presents multifaceted challenges for securing banks. As financial institutions transform their front and back offices, legacy technical debt, API ecosystems, AI, and other dynamics introduce increasing array of risks. Michael, welcome to the show. Could you introduce yourself and give our listeners a quick look at your extensive background and describe F5s for those who are unfamiliar with your firm?
Sure, Jim. Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast. This is super exciting. We're in an amazing time as it relates to financial, community and our financial institutions, the market, and security and cybersecurity as it relates. I'm Michael Wiley, VP of Applications and CTO at F5 Networks. I've been with F5 for about 3 years, a little over 3 years now. Prior to that, I did a stint at Google for a decade and JP Morgan for a while, for a few years. And so I decided to go to F5 because F5 isn't just really this unique marketplace and opportunity where we're serving, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applications. And some of our critical customers that we work with are financial institutions, governments, and retail. So we're beyond the traditional load balancer view of the world that F5 has. We have a significant security footprint, a distributed cloud, and we focus on continuing to expand that portfolio.
So we got to start somewhere. So can you give our listeners a little bit of an overview of the evolving threat landscape in banking as it relates to digital transformation efforts currently being embarked on? And how have cyber threats become more sophisticated, and what's at stake?
Well, there's a lot at stake. I would say this, Jim, if you just step back and look at it, computing resources, the internet, the many surface areas that now we have to contend with, from mobile devices to the browser, et cetera, they're continuing growing in the markets, and so the threat landscape is growing exponentially as well. And so the bad actors have the same tools that we have. They have the AIs, the large language models. They have the machine learning, PyTorches, the sklearns, the Python scripts. They have the capabilities to deploy these things, and they're very focused on, the defense mechanisms and the practices and patterns that most financial institutions, employ or deploy today. So it's probably not good that we would ever put our head in the sand to think that they're not trying to attack the most lucrative environment in the world, and that's some financial institution or entity. And so these are now becoming more and more pervasive, and they will continue to grow and extend capabilities. It wouldn't even go far to think about what an AI surface using a Python library like LangChain could build, attack, vector, against someone's a particular account or an API endpoint. So, I could get into a lot of the gory details about how that might show up, but the risk to the financial institutions, and I think it's always been the risk. There's always a brand risk. People walk. from institutions, and they take their money and they go somewhere else. And I think we've normalized this a little bit, Jim, where in the market you hear sometimes, oh, my data was leaked here, or these people got this retail company X leaked my data, or this financial company Y leaked my data, and so we see these kind of cases show up, and people kind of get compensated around the way. But for the most part, my opinion is that we kind of normalized this in the market. I don't see market shifts or changes because some data leak. But what you probably see is disposable income moving out of the bank, going somewhere else. What you probably see now is it's an N+1 problem where, okay, now my bank is tight on credit. I've got highest interest rates. I can't, and now there's a security problem that might make people completely move out of the institution and go to something else. And so they've completely moved out of brick and mortar, and it's all online, right? So the bank is faced with trying to keep this loyal customer that's been there for a very long time and will continue to be so, with protecting them in the security through their security practices. And if they don't, customers will walk.
It's interesting to say that because as consumers get more and more comfortable and have higher and higher expectations around digital engagement and digital usage, at the same time, these same customers, myself included, get frustrated by some of the things that are out there to protect us because it doesn't make it as easy. It makes it more difficult.
Right.
How do financial institutions balance between offering a really seamless, good user experience and ensuring good security?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jim. And maybe I would even propose that there's really not a balance. It's expected. So I need good security and I need good experience. And I don't, and that all has to exist for me. So I would say to properly answer the question is you're going to make these now decisions as a business, as a financial institution, to start moving your products and your services closer to that consumer in a lot more predictable, reliable, kind of low latent, way. And that kind of solves the customer experience space, but it extends your security footprint and that surface. So what you then have to do is start building policies around that as you start growing. And these might be forcing functions for you, especially if you're dealing with some compliance or regulatory thing. If I'm going to Singapore, or if I'm going to the UK, or if I'm involved in a certain fintech in a different market, I need to address the customer experience scenario, and I need to address the security policy controls in that market, in that app. So I'm contending that there's not it's not necessarily a balance. It's a must-have on both sides. Yeah.
It's interesting because whenever I'm on an app of any sort, and it all of a sudden asks me to actually type in my security code. The reality is, I get frustrated because I think, geez, you have it, you know me, I maybe use my biometric, my facial ID or something like this. And I realize it's for my good, but it creates frustration, and it creates that dynamic that says, why can't we make this easier? So as you said, it's not an either or, it's a both, but it's making it so the customer also understands why it's important for them, or we give them a better option. It's interesting because every financial institution right now is using multiple systems. If they were all the legacy systems, they'd fall behind on every front. If they're all the digital systems, they've spent a lot of money, but it doesn't guarantee security. But it's that mix, I believe, that concerns me. I'm not a security expert by a long shot. But if I think about my financial institution, I realize they have some legacy technical debt. They have the multiple generations of infrastructure. What is the cost and complexity of actually making security work when there's so many different systems interacting with each other?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think we have to be a tad bit empathetic to the financial institutions here. They build amazing products, and in the past, and then technology shifts and changes have happened, and this difficulty of staying very regulated and controlled and secure also creates a bit of a slow of adoption and or innovation sometimes. And so now there's a lot of pressure in the market to innovate, to integrate, to be in a particular product or cloud or service, et cetera, and provide yet another capability and feature into an app. So when you look at legacy systems, you're really stuck with the fact that DB2 is not going away, the mainframe's not going away, and MQ is not going away. So all of these things have to be maintained and supported. What tends to happen is, and I think this is where you're expressing your frustration a little bit in, is people kind of move from the old to the new shiny object, the feature in the app that they want to go build into these other services, and find themselves, I have to spend a lot more time, trying to get out of this legacy and this middleware or these lower tier environments. They have a natural propensity to decline. They get left alone. It's a cost that you have to actually account for when you're looking at your digital transformation. What am I going to move out of that legacy space and place, or what am I going to keep? And so if you're just microservicing things and building additional API calls and or trying to move to a public cloud or refactor your application, it is imperative that you carry the legacy system costs and maintenance and operations, and so it doesn't dilapidate over time and create a particular vulnerable environment. And so there's a significant cost associated with that. Sometimes I see it getting missed. So that's why you choose architectural decisions as well to keep alive some of this legacy space in place, but also surface these new applications, API calls, and other inside newer technologies and newer architects.
So financial institutions now more than ever are using these composable solutions, these small solutions that basically take care of problems that every financial institution has. As you work with banks and credit unions, how do you help them test security and then validate security over time when there's so many different pieces, parts going on at the same time?
Yeah, it's a continuum of evolving landscape, because there's no one tool that fits all, Jim. To be honest with you, you're going to continue to grow your unit testing and application testing as you're building new, and evolving or refactoring the old or keeping the old around and the legacy. So what worked for the legacy environments doesn't necessarily work for the newer ones. And so how do you munge these things together? And so, we tend to assume and or argue that this continuous integration, continuous deployment, the CI/CD pipeline with all of its checks and balances and flags of things could get that done. It's not all in that either, right? So this takes a very unique approach to building a security test suite, how you're going to unit test, how you're going to build customer experience testing, how you're going to pen test your environment, what kind of logs and things you're going to be checking, how are you going to consume all this data and sift through it. And that's it's an evolving art, for the security teams. And every environment is different, and so we have to, navigate ourselves circumspectly through each environment, given the scenarios and situations that they're in.
Well, it's interesting too, because a lot of these composable solutions are not managed by the financial institution. They're add-ons. And when you're working with a financial institution, how do you stay on top of not only what's going on in the marketplace from a security risk standpoint, but when you're bringing on new applications that are not managed by the financial institution themselves, but they're from a third-party provider or from a fintech firm, how do you as a company work with the financial institution to continually validate that something else hasn't changed in the mix?
Yeah, and this is where I kind of reference that in as far as the architectural decisions that you end up making. You need to integrate with a service, a fintech. This is, zero trust works the other way. right? Not only from zero trusting the ingress side and for people coming in to access an API call, I could also apply the same principles to a API call service to like Zelle or to a PayPal or to a
Right.
different service out. Whatever I send you and whatever you send me back, I mean, we have to live in this trust but verify space, right? And or zero trust and, run our policies there. So I can still maintain from an architectural, financial, entity data center app, core business and surface my API through like an API gateway service and do those API calls with the Zelles and the PayPals. I'll use those examples and do trust but verify there and do authentication authorization there, do policy control and management there, do something in that space so I can continually validate things that are going out the door and things that are coming in the front door.
So you mentioned zero trust, and it's gaining a lot of traction in the marketplace. Could you explain a little bit about what this means in the context of banking and how this could revolutionize the way banks approach cybersecurity?
Well, I think we're at it's 2010 since I think the concept came out, or I forgot the gentleman's name that brought this up. I'll figure it out when we get through the podcast probably. But so zero trust is just this implicit, I don't trust, just as the name says, I don't trust anything that's, I'm communicating or is communicating to me. And so the idea is to validate this at every stage and level of the interaction. And so when it goes beyond the traditional thinking of what the banking institution or financial institution and other enterprises had, where if I can just put a firewall and a router and, have this perimeter security model that, everything else is protected from the back, from behind and inside the infrastructure. And it's just simply not true. And so now you need to employ these particular practices, such as zero trust. Google had a Beyond Corp, and so now I need to know what device is communicating to me. Who is the identity of this person? Are they authorized to do certain things, especially in a remote work environment as well as a consumer environment, right? So I need to always just be taking this position of, I don't know who you are. I don't trust you, and I therefore will interrogate and validate everything that you do as you're coming in to access any one of my services. So that revolutionizes the bank in a way that says we can now move faster, more securely. We can sleep better, right? That knowing that our systems are not as compromised, because we've built these policies of extending now the perimeter security thinking more to the edge, but at a higher level than just the IP address and port and 443 SSL, a couple of header checks. That doesn't work anymore. We have to actually extend that capability to where we're continually interrogating the client and the app and the service, and we're validating that everything coming in and everything going out is exactly the way we expect it to be, and it's secure and safe.
It's interesting. You just brought it up, the fact of the remote work. With the rise of mobile banking and remote work, obviously the attack surface has expanded exponentially. I mean, it's global as opposed to regional or local. How can banks effectively secure their operations while still accommodating the growing trend towards remote work?
Yeah, I would, go back to just that previous answer a little bit. We built collaborative tools to be collaborative anywhere in the world, right? And so COVID almost was a forcing function to get to start now using all of these tools and capabilities. At the same time, expose a significant opportunity, right? Which was, I need to now surface all of this internal assets, internal applications of things externally, so my remote workforce can access this in a more programmatic and reasonable, reliable way. Which opened up a lot of opportunities for companies like F5 and to come in and say we can secure those and we can surface those APIs in that layer. So I think any enterprise, financial, retail, et cetera, has to make these decisions to say we need to provide the ability to accommodate a now a mobile workforce, be it through a mobile application or through a remote worker in a particular part of the world, and surface up whatever tools and capabilities that they need to do in order to be effective and do their job. And we can take these same practices of zero trust. We can take these same practices of trust but verify and interrogating things as they come in and access these services. And that needs to be part of your overall plan, because you're going to scale. If you're going to scale into a market, you're going to bring on new users. You're not going to go brick and mortar at this stage usually. That'd be a significant cost in this market anyway. But you would definitely not go, try to rebuild or brand in. I'll use in APAC, if you're a U.S. company and build a bunch of real estate assets and a bunch of people there, you're probably going to go start with a remote workforce. And so we have to build this into our overall security posturing.
So in other podcasts, we've talked to people that talked about identity and authentication. Is there a future? Because as a consumer, we all have the same concerns that financial institutions have, but just in a different scale and a different way. Is there a future where there could be security as a service where the financial institution could actually sell or partner with consumers and small businesses to provide them the security discipline that they have to have for their organization?
I think there is. I think there's an opportunity. I don't know, what the uptake in the market is, but I think that here's what's interesting about maybe new markets that the financials could get into, and because they are highly regulated, they have to go through a ton of more hoops to secure their data and the services that they offer. I think you generally are wanting to share a bunch of data if you're banking with someone or if you're doing financial transactions, be it investments or not, or real estate, et cetera. So I think the bank is in a great, or the financial institution is in a great spot to provide these levels of services that then they could obfuscate, or they could be the mediator between another service and for validation reasons and so on and so forth. I think you always have a sector of the world that's going to say, that's too much information. I don't want to, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have, and then, but you also have like me, and I would go, but you already have it anyway, right?
Exactly. It's like being afraid of the government. It's kind of like going, okay, where do you think you're going to stop that?
I don't know why wouldn't you offer the service? Because I don't want to. Because actually, the truth is, Jim, I don't want to give it to anybody else because I'm extending my threat landscape and my endpoints as I continue to offer more about me to everyone. So if I was giving all of my data to an Amazon and all my data to a Google and all of my data to a bank and all my data to so now I've extended my threat landscape, and surface area. I'm kind of okay with the bank offering a proxy service to allow for those things to happen at an identity level. And by the way, it helps a lot on the fraud side. So if you were doing multi-factored through a banking institution and validating certain things, even from a general, back and forth payment transaction level stuff, I would have no problem with that. And by the way, fintechs are building this way too.
Well, it's interesting because you think about the remote cameras and everything else we do to secure our homes. But I think of the different ways that people are trying to attack my computer every day with different things. I can, push this button and get this invoice that you owe me or whatever it may be. And I know, don't touch any link, don't do anything unless you know it's from. And even then, validate zero trust security in a way. But the reality is consumers are being hit in so many different ways. And there are organizations such as yours that are going so deep into what can happen. You're always going to be at least kept up with the cyber criminals and making it more difficult. And then it becomes just like when you do with your car. The more security I put in place, the less likely that I'll be the one that's hit. They're going to go for an easier hit. It just seems to me to be, we look at all these other banking as a service things and embedded banking and all these other elements that an embedded security protocol that's sold by or offered by my financial institution seems to make sense. Speaking of these third parties, open finance and embedded banking, what are the security implications of open finance and embedded banking when you're really partnering with non-financial institutions as opposed to people that have to actually sell to financial institutions?
Yeah, I think how would I summarize that, Jim? Not all APIs are created equal, right?
Mm-hmm.
The level of trust, if you think about just from a personal interaction, like me and you, we know each other, we trust each other over time, we can have these dialogues and these interactions. And if you did something that was a little bit off, center, and I did something that was maybe a little bit off center, you might degrade my trust, right? And you might, not trust me so much in this circle of friends or things like that. So
Yep.
Extend it out to API calls, right? Extend it out to whomever you're making calls to. I'm making calls to another fintech or to a retail service or to a crypto exchange or whomever, right? And so what you really want is a bit of a policy engine and mediator in between those API calls that is looking at it from this thought, right? This thought of, I trust you to this point. And then if you go a little bit further and we've had this interaction for a period of time, I trust you a little bit more. And I continue to trust you until you give me a reason not to. Right. And then when you give me a reason not to, I back out of that a little bit more. And maybe I come back in a little bit further. So you're sending, if you're an institution like JP Morgan, you're sending stuff to Zelle, and Zelle's sending stuff back to you. Now, through the message formatting of things, those protocols make sense and the formats look great and stuff like that. But what if Zelle just kept on sending the same transactions 1,000 times over because they were compromised? You have to have a system that sits there and says, "Hey, wait a second, Zelle, you've got issues here. You need to back off of what you're doing." So we would try to argue that that's a denial of service kind of approach to it. And so in the case of like F5's thinking, sometimes is we look at it this way. We look at it like, regardless of who you are, what API calls you're going to make in the world, they need to be secure, and we need to trust them. They need to trust you, and we need to be able to have these interactions in a very safe and secure manner, and provide a policy that you can implement across, regardless of where the cloud, where the product exists in the world. The product can exist in any public cloud or on-prem in a data center, but if you're not servicing these APIs or these kind of calls through an entity like a gateway service or a particular API, gateway thinking or policy thinking, then yeah, you're at risk, and your logic has to be built in the application, and that's not reasonable. Yeah.
So when you walk into a financial institution, what is the most common challenge you see financial institutions have that you help solve?
It's going to be the digital transformation, moving from your legacy to your future environment or the future infrastructure that you're moving into, and then bringing that same kind of F5 experience with it. So that way you're not having to put again, technical debt. You're not having to reinvent the wheel every time you walk in. I'm moving X app to Y location. I can literally bring that with you as an F5, customer. You can also, we also bring really in just security and observability awareness, right? This is a data-driven world. Brother, we're not, we have to sift through.
We're not going to have less.
Yeah, right. We have more data than we know what to do with, and we're still trying to figure out what is the data that we should be paying attention to and when. And I think when you put something like an F5 product in your business, we help solve a lot of that problem.
So really, it's as organizations have expanded their partnerships, their platforms, the way they integrate, the way they latch on different systems together, that's where you really come in. That's the challenge that most organizations are having to solve. They were able to solve for their organization when it was just one legacy platform. But now that they're bringing other elements in from the outside, you bring them the security, literally, of being able to work with those different platforms, correct?
Yeah, and you can kind of think of it like system thinking. Remember when the system used to be just a machine and a database and an app and that one call, right, you would make to that one system. Now that system has grown to be thousands, tens of thousands of endpoints, and maybe if not applications and or nodes or servers inside of an infrastructure, not just one infrastructure, many, right? And so in different parts of the world. And so when you look at it from a whole system level approach, F5 is kind of like in the middle of these calls, right? As a user comes in through the front door, they're going across an F5, usually a load balancer or a web application firewall or security layer, and then they're hitting that application. So you've got a lot of validation checkpoints and capabilities there. In our distributed cloud products, it's kind of the same thing. You actually as you're doing the digital transformation, you're bringing your app out of your data center into a distributed cloud endpoint, right? And you're surfacing that API to the rest of the world. You might move your backend app or the middleware or the backend service into an AWS or a Google or Azure, but those API calls are secure through that vehicle, as well as the what you're surfacing out to the rest of the market. So F5 just kind of plays as a proxy, as a service, as a capability from a security layer throughout all of your transformation, be it on-prem, off-prem, et cetera.
So part of the digital transformation, many organizations is moving to the cloud. There was a time not too long ago that virtually every organization talked about the cloud, but was really afraid from a security perspective moving to the cloud. Has the cloud become so advanced and so much easier to manage, given the scale of the data being managed, that actually cloud environments are more secure in most cases than if an organization stays within their legacy platform?
Yeah, I could go a couple ways on this one, Jim.
Yeah, it was interesting because as I'm saying it's one of those questions to say, not always, but it's not giving you the answer.
Yeah, it depends, right? I think the question you really gets down to, Jim, is that are you going to take your $100 million or multi-billion-dollar business and give it to, a computing resource sitting in some cloud somewhere and say, ship and pray, right? And I tend to say they're not going to do it all, right? They'll do some pieces of it. And so this is, are cloud secure? Yes. Or is everybody, computing resources and storage and security practices, these are all cloud commodities at this point, right? And, in regards to whatever public cloud you go into and whatever market, they're all going to have, generally the same thinking. I think it really comes down to a fundamental challenge of what are you doing with your security policy? And and do you have one that universally works across any cloud environment? Are you always going to be with an AWS? Are you going to use just AWS for your ML platform? Or are you going to use Google for that? Are you going to put your front ends only in Azure and your ADFS and your authentication layer there, and that's it? And how are you surfacing and iterating all of these other components of your application? And I think it just comes down to the security team has to come up with a very good security policy layer that works across all of these environments. And that's a significant challenge because you're playing this game, right? You're playing, I assume you're going to be secure, and I can validate that to a point. But I'm going to check everything coming in the front door. Like I said earlier, I'm going to validate everything as it comes in. I'm going to see what calls are being made, where, to whom, to how, and what's being leaked in and out. If not, I will be at risk and vulnerable, and therefore it's not a good policy. So I think that's it, Jim. I don't think I want to. Yeah. I wouldn't be critical of any cloud.
It's not a checkbox type scenario, yeah. Right? Yeah. So AI and machine learning were really used first in the risk and fraud areas. I mean, where you started monitoring transactions and saw anomalies. Yep. It's being used more and more to enhance cybersecurity, but it's also being used more and more to create cybersecurity risks. How do these technologies play a role in both anticipating and mitigating risks? And what are some real world applications right now in banking?
Yeah. So, well, we're not getting away from it, right? I mean, so AI and ML are like words and letters we have to maintain in our vocabulary for the rest of our lives. So the truth of the matter is, like I said earlier, bad actors and good actors have both the tools. The data sets and the mass amount of data that is flying now and coming to the enterprise and the security teams and inside any one of these financials is unimaginable. Yeah, it's really just unimaginable. And so to get to ground truth, right, really fast is something that where ML and AI has to play a role. Now, I think there's a little bit of how would I say it, a buffer in this. If you're, I would pick on JP Morgan for a second. If you're a JP Morgan, you have, let's just say 100 million users, and I don't think you're doing 100 million transactions every second or every minute of the day, right? A banking transaction is pretty short-lived. It's pretty ephemeral, and so that doesn't mean that that they're not taking the app data and other types of information. So I say that today you get a bit of a pass. But in the future, I don't think you get that pass at all. Remember the cross-border payments. I need to send data from, now it's no longer, a 3-day business tour, right? It's a 1 second, transaction, validation, and ship it to any entity in the world. And so those level of transactions exponentially grow, and they will be now at the burden of the feet of the security teams, right? And so they have to solve for that. And that's where the machine learning and the AI stuff starts to come into play. They have to go back over their fraud and anomaly detection, type of business, and they have to now change the surface or change the particular patterns and things that they're paying attention to. The bad actors show up as well, right? So as these things continue to evolve, you're fighting this new kind of mining data, digging through resources and and surfacing things that we should be paying attention to, and even instrumenting your application and infrastructure to allow you to catch that even earlier. But I argue that that's an organic, natural course. We're all going to get there. AKA F5, AKA let's get there together. But it's going to be a significant run for sure.
So, looking ahead, or maybe looking at today, what keeps you up at night? What scares you?
What scares me?
From a banking security perspective, by the way.
You opened the door, bro. I'm glad you put the classification. It's a good question too, because I really I think what scares me is my identity, my current footprint, and the things that are being shared as it relates to my activities. And as it relates to security, I want to trust an entity like a JP Morgan, a Chase. I want to know that you've secured everything. This is your data, my data. We have this implicit trust relationship, and I've given you my money. We have these kind of relations where I've got a mortgage for you, I've got insurance, I've got other things, right? Other instruments that I've used through your institution, and I want to know that it's safe, right? I want to go to a search engine and know that I'm safe as well, right? I want to go to another entity and know that I'm safe as well. I tend to think that that's not the case today, and not because of JP Morgan or a search engine or another entity. It's because I don't think that we've made this the right amount of investments and paid attention to this in a very practical, programmatic way to go. I need to make sure my customers, completely safe, and that I'm not going to share this data. If you took the lawsuits that have just been kind of, ratified or come out, with different social media companies, and the things that they've had to pay out for losing data, sharing data, so on and so forth. So I think that my kids have to worry about that. I've done pretty well in my own, thinking, logic, and experience. But my kids, they have to worry about where's my data? Where's it going? To whom is it going? Because the attack vectors is this. If I knew that you had an Amazon account and a Netflix account and a Hulu account and a Spotify account, and I could somehow compromise any one of those accounts, and I see some pattern over there, I could probably move that same logic from a username, password thinking, and other types of credentials over to your banking account. And so as soon as I compromise one of those things, I'm into your other banking account right now, right? And that could be Starbucks gift cards, so you get what I'm saying, right? So I think that's where we have to be careful.
I'm laughing because you just scared, instead of what keeps you up at night, you now have put, you scared me. You've made it, because it's the reality. I mean, and it's also interesting because in my daily life, I probably trust Amazon as much or more than any other organization. They have not had flaws. They have not had, they have not had infrastructure issues. They have not had risk issues.
Yeah.
However, you just brought up a very good point that says, okay, you may be okay there, but if you shared a password with your XYZ account, with your bank account, with other things, they may be safe, but something else that the human has done, because what's interesting is securing yourself is not easy. I'm sorry, but having 8,000 passwords and I only have one face, so I love everything that uses my face as my password. But even that, you get worried about what can happen with AI. So, okay, so final question. I'm a CIO. I'm a key element of a financial institution. What is the one thing I need to do today to move me forward from a cybersecurity risk standpoint?
Yeah, front and center, right, in my mind is, it's really about sometimes taking inventory, Jim, initially. I think we don't know what we don't know, and this is where I think people are a little bit fearful and afraid of that. And so I think you live with the way the world is, sometimes not the way you want it to be. And so you have to do some significant inventory and analysis of the world you're in. And sometimes that goes back to the zombie API discussion, goes back to the legacy infrastructure, right? And in part of your digital transformation strategy, take inventory. And those things that now that you have inventory, you can start making the next first decision, which is, as I modernize these applications, do certain things, I don't have to change the whole infrastructure. If you gave a CISO $1 billion today and said, go, it would be impossible to implement and proliferate that much technology in any short period of time, in any financial institution in the world, no matter how much money you gave them in a budget, right? Across all aspects of the technology that the market wants you to have, right? From ZTNA, from the WAS, to the firewalls, to everything. By the time you were done, right, you'd be years into this game, right? And probably not $1 billion, but it'd be a significant chunk. So if you're going to do something today, I take inventory and I would start working towards this surfacing APIs in a very predictable manner, that you have this API management service that you can now start leaning in on additional levels of controls through a policy or through different authentication services. These are things that you should just have. Like, they should just exist today. Yeah. I look at it like an embassy. You don't roll up on an embassy without some concrete walls and a security guard, right? And and a passport check and an appointment and so you can't walk into an application in the current world today and say, oh, well, that app lives in Amazon and that app lives over in Azure and that app lives over in Google, and so you're doing all different levels of policy management controls and different things. You're exposing this potential risk, right, and creating an environment because of a lack of an API management solution. Right. So, and inventory. Zombie API exists because people forgot that they opened up an API in some point and they left it, and the people moved on to a different role or job or something and worked on something different. And they go, oh, no, we left that API open and it's sitting somewhere, right? Yeah. And so, API management is intended to solve some of that, and security in APIs is through an API management. So deciding what you have and knowing what you have in your environment, and then deciding what you're going to do from an API management viewpoint, then we'll tell you that I don't need to throw a lot of money at that API because I'm just going to shut it off. It's not going to be existing in tomorrow, and that's just a simple control. There's nothing there. Yep. Or here's the data and the schemas that I'm surfacing right on this API. This is super critical. So we don't rank and stack these APIs as severity. I would argue that a little bit on my tangent here. I'll get off here. If it would be interesting to talk to a CISO and say this: what are the top 10 APIs, and what are the risks that you have with respect to those APIs in your business right now? Like, tell me the top 10. Tell me the top 10 by traffic, by users, by risk category, yep, by something. If you can't tell me that, you are not doing an API strategy, right? And you don't have the policies and controls in place that you need. That's what I would probably go focus on.
It's very interesting, Michael. In a nutshell, every financial institution should have a company like F5 come in and ask you the questions that you're scared of asking yourself. It's that simple, because the reality is the questions themselves will move an organization forward and make them uncover things that they may not have thought of. And oh, by the way, have that as a regular process, because these questions change over time. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. It's a subject we don't cover very much, but when we do, it's enlightening. If not from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint as well. So I really appreciate having you on the show today.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate being here.
Thanks for listening to Banking Transformed, the winner of 3 international awards for podcast excellence. We appreciate the support we have received to make this endeavor a success. If you enjoy what we're doing, please take some time to show some love in the form of a review. Finally, be sure to catch my recent articles on the financial brand and check out the research we're doing for the Digital Banking Report. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to our senior producer, Leah Haslage, audio engineer, Chris Fafalius, and video producer, Will Pritz. I'm your host, Jim Marous. Remember, innovation propels us forward, but it's the harmonious marriage with security that ensures we arrive safely.